assessing him whether indeed he could be potentially a recipient of the revelation. Because he's truthful, that's what the claim is. And then you have this objection. So let's establish, his truthfulness.
No.
So when
What do you want?
No. He demonstrated that.
You have the white. I'll go for white.
Living with them for 40 years. So he went into one of the mountains and he called them. Just like in the earlier times when there was no, mobile phones or emergency alarms and things like this, people had different mechanisms. Like they would go to a church bell, ding, 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 and then you have to all gather together, right? Arabs had a similar kind of emergency call, emergency protocol. So if somebody goes on the top of the mountain and says, Ya Sabaha, something of this nature, they will say something important that we need to all go.
How Jesus was preaching to Jews at the time.
Possibly. So they all left their work, their study, their attendance, whatever it might be. They came to this place. An imminent danger perhaps. That's why someone is calling them. This is the routine protocol. So he said to them, if I told you that there's an army behind the mountain waiting to attack you, would you believe? Guess what they said?
What did they say?
Have a guess.
No.
He said, here it was again. He said, if I told you there's an army waiting to attack you behind the mountain, would you believe me? What do you think they would have replied?
If they believe what he was saying about preaching and everything, they'll believe him, they'll say yes.
They would say yes based on what?
Based on
Their
what?
previous experience of him,
Yeah.
that he never lied. Yep. And they indeed said that. We would believe you because we've never known you to lie. And then when he said, I come to tell you that God has made me a prophet, I'm paraphrasing the narratives, he's made me a prophet to tell you and inform you that there is no deity or gods worthy of worship. Not these idols that you worship, but there's only one and only God that we should all worship, abandoning all these false gods. That's where some of them people turned aside. Because what's going to happen now? Because they realize their whole livelihood, their whole economy, their whole business is based on this polytheistic belief system of making idols in Mecca. People will come for Hajj and different occasions, bring in money. Yeah? And now all of these idols are defunct. They are now totally annihilated. They are no longer in action. So no one will come and give them any homage, any puja, any worship, any money, any resources. Financially, they will be all bankrupt and dead. Their business. That's why they were saying, what? They didn't want to do that. But those who, of course, understood already that there cannot be more than one God, of course they realized, indeed, it must be it. That was just from his statement and claim alone, from his character. Not looking at any other evidence. The only evidence those were impressed by is his 40 years of life in which he demonstrated the purity of character, truthful, reliable. Okay, so they turned later on, instead of accepting this call, to fight him, to oppose him, to stop him calling people to the worship of one God. Yeah, worship of one God. That was their problem with him. So when he started calling people later on, stop burying your daughters alive. Of course, it was a tradition that was so much in their blood and their skin or bones. It's in my blood, in my flesh and blood. So much that it requires for them to really wake up. Like, why am I burying my daughters alive? So when the Quran came with that message, it really woke some people and said, yeah, we should stop doing that practice. But others, for them, this is our tradition. Why are we going to? So these kind of revolutionary ideas that goes against societal norms, people can react to and oppose. It's a natural thing. Those who are
even before the Prophet, we've seen it with Jesus, and we've seen it probably before that as well. And when with Moses or Musa, whatever you want to call him, people were opposed to him when he came to Egypt and tried to exile the Jews. People were against the Ten Commandments. People were worshipping idols even then. So we've seen this before. We've seen the connection.
Yeah.
Like, we've seen
so there's a human nature in which they oppose and react to something that goes against their tradition, their desires, their feelings, and what they're happy and comfortable with. That's a natural and not a normal thing for in most societies. So what happened then? He gave them the message of the Quran. That message was what? Worship the Satan? Worship the creation? Worship me? None of that. He said, no, worship the one who created all of these things. Because the one who deserves your worship is the one who gave you life, who brought everything to existence. Now, that message itself, if you examine the message now, it's sensible. It's something that your heart and your mind will say, yeah, why am I going to worship a tree, a man or a woman, or the moon, or the sun, or the rivers? Makes no sense. These are all limited, dependent, finite things which are not worthy of our worship. Is my umbrella worthy of worship?
No.
Why not?
Created by a man.
Okay. Why should you worship an umbrella? But there are people who believe God can become an umbrella and still be a God. So that's what we need to start thinking about, why people believe in such a things. That's another discussion. So, coming to this point. So the message that he brought about don't worship idols or anything of the creation, but worship God, is not a message inspired by any evil things. It's a message of purity and truth. That's what you expect from a sound intellect to accept. Okay. The way he then brought the message is the second evidence that comes in now, assessing the message that he brought.
Yeah.
When he brought this message, the Quran came in a language which was familiar and yet unfamiliar to them. What do I mean by that?
So he was illiterate, but he could speak Arabic.
It was familiar yet unfamiliar. And what do I mean by that? So he brought the Quran in the Arabic language, the language of the people.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if the
He was
Quran,
Arabic, he was an ethnic Arabic.
if the Quran came in Chinese, they would not know what it means. Exactly, right? It was in Arabic, but they noticed a subtle difference. It came in a form that was not only beautiful, eloquent, full of meaning, but something else. In a way that is composed, that they realized this is not something that they could do. And what I mean by that is this. Arabs at that time, they took pride in two things. One is the birth of a child. What kind of child? Son or a daughter? Son. Because they would bury their daughters alive. Why they would bury? They would bury their daughter alive. They will take the daughters at whatever point. They will take that daughter and bury her alive. Why? Because they considered, in their faulty thinking, that's a financial liability. Because they have to look after her and marry her off with everything, and then they don't have that financial resource. Just like today, how people abort female fetuses. It hasn't changed. People do that. They abort. If the fetus is female, they abort it. So this kind of infanticide, or female infanticide, still rampant in today's society. Anyway, that's another discussion. So they would pride themselves in two things. One is the birth of a son. It's not a daughter anymore. They don't have to bury, because the son will accompany them, bring them honor and glory, and fight with them and work with them and so on. So that's how they made themselves really, really happy and proud, right? That was point one. The other thing that they're proud about, and they celebrated, is the composition of poetry. They love poetry so much that they used to hold competitions in the markets, like Market of Wakaz. They'd go there, and the best poem they would hang on the wall of the Kaaba. Remember, Kaaba to them is a very sacred place. Okay? They would worship the idols within the Kaaba. There were many idols inside the Kaaba. And when Prophet Muhammad came, of course, he destroyed all of them from the Kaaba, cleansed it. But this is how Kaaba, the cube, Muslims circumambulate in Hajj. Yeah. This was the first house built for the worship of God, right? So they would hang the poem, the best of them, in the wall of the Kaaba. That's why they are called mu'allaqat, the hanging, suspended poems. And some of those poems are available to us today. Available. We can still read them, translated by A.J. Arbery. It's called the Seven Odes. You can read about it. Even in English, how he captures the beauty and the way they describe things. Really, really nice, right? So they were masters in oration, masters in eloquence, masters in the way how they describe their loved ones. If they describe something like sorrowful, you would cry. If they describe a woman in her beauty, you would lust for her. If they describe something about like this particular tribe is an enemy, you would be ready to fight them. This is the power of speech that they had. They excelled in this capability. So poetry was their thing, right? When the Quran came in response to this in the Arabic language, saying, look, you know this man for 40 years of his life has not been taught how to read or write, has not been taught how to read any scripture, because you know him. He grew up among you. So the Creator, gave them the Quran, says, okay, if you really have doubt that he is now a recipient of revelation, produce something like it, because you are the masters of language. If you can't do it yourself, do it all together. Have your support, except God, except Allah. But if you don't do it, and the Quran says you'll never be able to do it, then fear the fire whose fuel is man and stones. So what did they do then? Yeah, man will fuel the fire of hell and stones. Now we know how stones can really bring hot fire, heat. But men will be the fuel of fire. Which men? The one who deserves it. Men mean humankind. Men, yeah. So the point is, the Quran gave them an opportunity to falsify the Quran. To say, look, if you really think he's not a prophet, all you have to do with your mastery of Arabic language, with your eloquence in the language, produce a chapter. Whole Quran you can't do it? No problem. How about 10 chapters? You can't do 10 chapters? How about one chapter, one surah? And how long is one chapter? The shortest chapter is how long? About 3 lines, 3-4 lines. So it wouldn't be difficult for them. But did they manage to compose something like the Quran? We have historical testimony of the people saying, لَيْسَ هَذَا كَلَامُ الْبَشَرِ. This is not the sayings of a human being. It's impossible. So this tradition continued to this day, and people have written for hundreds of years the so-called attempts people are doing. Do you think people have stopped attempting? You can go on the internet, surah like it, and you will see that, oh, there you go, that's what an imitation is. But all of these attempts, they amount to naught, zero. Why? Because they don't even understand. Some of them bring Psalms 23 in English. They think, there you go, it's an imitation of the Quran.
Mention that about poetry, they're saying that Islam has the best poetry in terms of beauty, in its language, in its literature. But poetry is another aspect of culture, which has existed before religion. So you see poetry in other religions as well. You see it in Hinduism, in the Vedas, in the Bhagavad Gita.
Poetry is everywhere.
Exactly.
That's not the point.
So I don't get why do you make
I'm
it...
explaining.
Yeah.
The point is the way things are composed. Like when Shakespeare wrote his sonnets,
Exactly. Yeah.
you can be genius like Shakespeare and imitate it. When Paul, the author of many letters in the New Testament, when he wrote his letters, you know, scholars today of the New Testament, they say this letter,
He didn't write that.
he didn't write it,
I don't
but
believe that. I don't believe he wrote them. I never believe that.
but do you know why they say that?
Why?
Because it is not in the style of Paul. Paul has a particular way of writing. So when they see another writing not like him, they'll say, Paul didn't compose and author this letter. So people have own composition, way of writing. Okay? What the Quran is saying, now you've understood it. Bring something like the composition of the Quran. So people, instead of writing, imitating the Quran, they didn't understand the message. They write something in English. Total misunderstanding of the challenge of the Quran is. If I say bring an umbrella like this one, yeah? And you bring, is that like this umbrella?
No.
This umbrella is particular length, particular color, particular structure, shape and so on. This is nothing like it. This is matter and this is matter. That's not how this is similar. So you need to bring another umbrella, but what if you bring an umbrella which was all white? I would still say it's not like it, because that one is white. Yeah. So when the Quran says bring a chapter like it, you need to know how the likeness of the Quran is. And the Quran has been objectively shown of its composition, how the Quran is in its structure. This is what we call stylistics.
Question. If you're saying that there's nothing like the Quran, same way you could bring the exact copy of this umbrella, there's an exact copy of this umbrella like this. Am I right or am I wrong in saying that?
We didn't say bring exact, similar.
Okay, but they're in the same color, weight and everything. This is the only umbrella that was ever invented.
You can bring an umbrella and say this is why it's similar. Similar in the...
I'm saying that there was more than one umbrella that was created in the same way,
Yeah.
in this pattern, this color, the same way.
Yeah, yeah.
So like when you went to the shop and bought this umbrella, you
Quran
saw
doesn't
several
say
other ones.
bring exactly like the Quran, word for word, letter for letter, sound for
I'm
sound.
saying,
In that way, what you'll bring the same Quran.
but then you could say
And-
scriptures before that existed before the Quran are similar in a way.
No.
How are they not?
To
Explain
give
how
you
they're
to
not.
give you an example, it's going to rain soon. To give you an example, when the Quran says, for example, first chapter, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, praise, all gratitude be to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds.
Hear, O Israel, your Lord, or the Lord our God is one.
You know, focusing what I'm saying.
Repeat.
So in Arabic structure, it is such that this is way the Arabs never spoke. In any of the literature, they have prose, they have poetry, sayings of the kuhan, the kahin. They don't speak like this. They never use this particular word, hamd, to praise in the beginning of a sentence with a definitive noun like alhamdu. They will say hamdan, yeah, with a indefinite article, yeah, not a definite article, the praise. When it say Rabbul Alameen, Lord of all the alameen, the Arabs never had in their vocabulary a word which is alameen in a plural form of alam, meaning world, because to them there is only one world, alam. So how can you bring something like alameen? It's like, did people have a vocabulary globalization 500 years ago in English? Globalization.
That wasn't a word.
That wasn't a word. So when the Quran says globalization, imagine for example like that, they'll say, what is this? But when the Quran in context explain globalization is this phenomenon, they'll say, oh, this is what it is. But you cannot imitate in a structure like
So
this.
you're telling me the words that existed in the Quran were never spoken before the Prophet
This,
arrived?
now you're getting this. So the Quran brought a linguistic innovation, revolution, in which it brought about the forms and derivations of words from the root which is understood, which the Arabs never knew of.
It never existed before.
It never existed. For example, or it brought the words or sentences in a meaning that didn't exist. For example, the very word the Quran, the Arabs never knew this form Quran and what it means. The Quran has to bring and explain what it is. It's a book, revelation from God. They knew, this is what it is. Because they had the word qara'a yaqra'u, the word to read, to recite, but the form in this gerund it's called, they never had that particular word Quran. They never had the word surah in its meaning, because to them surah is like a fence. But the Quran is using the surah to mean a chapter of the Quran. The verse in Arabic is an ayah. Ayah, Quran says it's a sign, it's a miracle, it's an evidence. For them, it's all new. So the Quran changes the meaning of the word and it brings about all of these things. So this is about how words are used, the placement of words and prepositions and nouns and verbs, whether it's a nominal sentence, like you start with a noun, or you start with a verb, or you start with a preposition, how they're constructed. We're talking about linguistic construction. These form, when the Quran brought it, they could not imitate it because they don't speak like that. For example, when I say, I am about to go, I don't say, I is about to go. You'd say, what are you talking about? Speak English, man. You don't say, I is going, you say, I am going. You don't say, I are going. Do you see that thing? So when the Quran brought a structure, and if they were to imitate it, they cannot imitate with, say, a substitute, with another synonym or something, in this form. It just becomes laughable. To give you one example of a laughable example. لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. There's an ayah like this in the Quran. No bearer can bear the sins of another. Everyone is individual, responsible for their own actions, right? So the word is ha mim la, yeah? To hamal, to carry. When it becomes in this form, if you want to,
Can I quickly ask you?
oh, sorry, no, the word is wazara. Wazara. I will let you
So
speak.
no bearer of, I just want to hear that.
No bearer
Yeah.
is going to bear the burden of another.
So no human can bear the sin of another human.
Yes, everyone is responsible for their own sin.
yeah.
Right. So the word is wazir, the bearer of burden, with surah ukhra. If you were to substitute with this with the word ha mim la, and you put it there, hamila, yahmil, and hamilatun wizra ukhra. it becomes laughable in this form because hamilatun automatically changes into meaning of a pregnant lady. You want you to say, no bearer of burden will bear the another, it will say, no bearer of burden bears the pregnancy of another. It becomes laughable, something like that.
No one can bear the pregnancy of a pregnant woman.
It becomes like a pregnant woman because the word now changes into a meaning.
The literal meaning.
Hamila in Arabic is a pregnant woman.
Okay, yeah, I'm following.
A pregnant.
Yeah.
So, in this particular form, when you try to put something there to imitate it, it doesn't work.
But we see this in other languages as well. Like in lexicon, we can't. Like in different
You could, fine,
like,
you could.
Yeah.
But the Quran is bringing an attention, a challenge in the Arabic language to the masters of the Arabic language. If you think the Quran is not from God, you should be able to imitate it. So he gave you a structure of how to imitate, and then people fail to imitate it. Even ChatGPT failed to imitate it. I have a whole 1-hour lecture on the internet. Type in ChatGPT, Quran, imitation, and Mansur, and you get that video. Helping the ChatGPT every way possible. Okay, can you, as a non-human, can you actually, with this objective criteria in mind, imitate the Quran? At the end, it's impossible because of the very nature of it. So, when the Quran brought a falsification test, and no one, in fact, the Quran says, "Kulla in ijtama'at al-insu wal-jinn." Even if the whole of human beings and the jinn were to come together collectively to produce something like the Quran, la ya'tuna bimithlihi. They will never be able to bring something like it. So the Quran is not restricting to one individual. You might say, Imo, I don't speak Arabic. Quran doesn't restrict that challenge only to you. Go and help, ask for help of your helpers and supporters to do this job. Go to SOAS, where they teach Arabic language. Go to Oxford, Cambridge, go to Harvard, go to all these places where people study in university level, have PhDs in Arabic language. But why is it still to this day people fail? Why are educated Muslims who have learned Arabic language to PhD level, done their PhDs, still remain a Muslim? If having a grasp of the language, they realize you can imitate it. Because once you become a very prolific writer, someone who can produce literature, a poet and so on, and you're an Arab, and you've mastered the language, you would know yourself whether you can imitate it or not. So why is that hundreds and thousands of millions of Muslims who are educated like that, they still remain Muslims and say it cannot be imitated?
It's the same thing for Christians who have PhDs,
and
Hindus who have PhDs,
and
atheists who have PhDs.
No, what's your point?
I'm saying that PhD, like, you're
No, you don't understand the point. I am saying, if educated Muslim in the Arabic language, through their education, they realized that the Quranic challenge is actually a hocus pocus, because you can make something like it, then to remain as a Muslim, you really have to be a hypocrite. Do you follow? To still say I'm a Muslim and you know that challenge doesn't make sense because I can imitate it, then you are really behaving like a hypocrite and say, I still as a Muslim, but inwardly you don't believe. Why are they still believing? It's because they know from their knowledge that it cannot be imitated.
So you're saying that anyone who studies Arabic,
anyone,
reads the Quran,
anyone who has mastered
and
in the Arabic language, like the Quran, they would know without shadow of doubt that the Quran cannot be imitated.
and if they don't follow, if they study Arabic and read the Quran and still choose not to follow Islam.
No, that's not about following. My point is, Quran offers a challenge.
Yeah.
Challenge to falsify it, to bring something.
So what do you mean by
Falsify meaning.
Yeah, find error.
Falsify meaning, if you were to bring a chapter, a surah like the Quran, then the Quranic claim is false. You would prove that the Quran can be imitated, and because it can be imitated, it cannot be from God. Because the Quran is saying it cannot be it cannot be imitated because God made it like that.
Can I disprove what you're saying by bringing in another concept? Can I do that?
You can try.
So you were talking about how the Quran is like its poetry is beautiful in its poetry
Composition.
in its composition. But then
Inimitable in its
you could go
composition.
to a Hindu
And
they'll tell you that the Vedas, so specifically the Bhagavad Gita, is beautiful in how it's written in Sanskrit, and that they literally believe
is it
same.
composition impossible, unimitable?
I'm not sure about that, but
Imagine now, to help you.
Yeah.
Imagine someone claims the Vedas cannot be imitated. You can get ChatGPT to imitate it.
How though? Because
Because the composition of the Veda, if you look at the
why do you say
stylistics,
imitated? Because
imitating in
believe that-
stylistics.
Yeah, okay, in stylistics, okay, cool. But in terms of narrative, like,
We're not talking
but
about
everything-
beauty and
okay, cool.
eloquence. You need to understand, Imo, I am not talking about eloquence.
Okay.
I'm not talking about beauty because these are all subjective.
So what are you talking about then?
I'm talking about the objective criteria of stylistics. In language, there's something called stylistics, how something is spoken. So I talked about placement of words, right? If you were to place a noun before, or a verb before, or a preposition before, and so on, how you place it, and how it affects the meaning. So if you were to imitate it, like this, and then you realize by imitating it, it becomes
Creates a fallacy though.
what fallacy?
So the way you compose a sentence can change its meaning, right? You agree with that?
When the Quran composes a sentence or an ayah, it has a meaning.
Yeah.
So it doesn't say bring similar meaning to it. It says, look, using this
So
structure,
you're telling me it has objective meaning to it. Every single sentence in the Quran.
try to understand what I'm saying.
I'm trying to.
The Quran is a book, literary book, right? Overall.
Yeah. No, but sorry, I just quickly cut you off. My friend told me that the Quran is, you shouldn't consider it as a book, but instead a verbal, like an oral thing.
No.
Yeah.
The Quran is a book. The Quran
So
is
it's
called
a
a
book.
kitab.
Not
The Quran is a book which is orally as well as written form.
What?
Quran has never been without a written form and has never been without an oral form. So the Quran, the Prophet didn't write it,
Exactly.
so he recited the whole book.
But it was written after he died.
Please. No. It was written, he dictated every single word that is in the Quran. So how can it be written after him?
So you're telling me the Quran was written while he was alive?
Hear me out
That's
again.
what I'm asking, I'm not sure.
Hear me out.
Yeah.
Every single word of the Quran was dictated by the Prophet.
Memorized.
You're not picking up the point.
Yeah.
Imo, listen. The Quran has 114 chapters, about 6,000 ayats, right? Roughly. Few hundred pages. Within that, every single word was dictated by the Prophet in his presence. Scribes wrote it, they read it back to him aloud, and this is how the Quran was written in front of him.
Okay.
So what wasn't done was during his lifetime, the Quran was composed as one book with two covers at the end. Everyone had their writings.
Well,
They were spread. They were spread in the writings of scrolls, in the shoulder blade of a camel, or in the leaf of a palm fiber stalk, or in stones, and so on and so forth. Right?
What's your question then? So we can all agree that the Prophet was illiterate.
Of
right?
course, he was
so
not.
How could he know what they were writing was in fact what he was saying?
Okay.
You can't. How do you know?
Imagine now I tell you, write this to me in your language, right?
Yeah.
قل هو الله أحد.
Impossible.
Okay,
Let's
right.
understand
Okay, write this. God is one
Yeah, I can write that.
in your language, and you just, I say, okay.
Well, just because I'm literate, I can write. I can read and write.
I
If
mean,
can't,
you
it's
asked me a
impossible.
question and allow me to
Okay,
answer.
yeah.
Then I say, okay, fine. I don't know what you've written. Read it to me back, and you read exactly. God is one. So, am I convinced that you have written it correctly?
But the Prophet cannot be 100% convinced. They could
Wait.
Yeah.
I dictated to you, and I told you to memorize it.
Yeah.
Remember, two forms.
Yeah, so it was
Graphic.
memorized before it was written down. I'm sorry. I have a question.
Simultaneous.
Okay.
Simultaneous. Memorize and written form.
Okay.
God is one. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. God is one and unique, right? You wrote it. The brother wrote it. Bilal wrote it. This brother wrote it, right? I said, okay, you read it. He says, God is one. God is one. God is one. You say, God is one. So I know that you've written it correctly. Then I said, okay, have you memorized it? I've told you, because this is life and death, like this is speech of God. He says, yeah, God is one. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. You teach them. And that's not it. That's not the end of this particular verse. You would then read it to get reward. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. So many times a day. You would recite it in your prayers. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. In Ramadan, you would read it so many times. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. So this particular ayah, it's not that only once it was in history and that was it. No. You cannot make it disappear from history. Every ayah like that. So this is how the Quran was preserved in memory and as well as written form. So when the Quran was composed like that, we're talking about the composition. People to imitate it, they have to put in that structure and they're failing that today. So this is what we're saying. It's a living miracle of the Quran, a living evidence that the Quran is indeed divine. Why? Because to this day, people cannot imitate it. They've imitated Shakespeare. If you have a phone now, you can ask ChatGPT, can you imitate that sonnet of Shakespeare? You will do it. Few seconds. Why? Because human speech is imitable. Human composition is imitable. You can imitate the styles. And that's why many forgeries happen throughout time. Later on, with a very fine tooth and eye, people said, that's a forgery, even though many things went unnoticed like that. They were so clever in imitating something. But at the end of the day, still, the point I'm making is human composition, whether it's music, whether it's poetry, it's imitable. Quran stands clear from all of that literature and says you cannot imitate it. That's number one evidence for the Quran. Secondly, out of many falsification tests and evidence, Quran says, had this book been from other than God, surely you would find many discrepancies and errors. And that makes sense. A book that talks about history, that talks about what's going to happen in the future, that talks about natural world, today we can say, I'm sure it can get something wrong, because people are back in those days, they knew not much about the reality. We, today with our current science and technology, we have learned about our world much better than what they thought earlier. They thought human beings were created with menstrual blood, which is in the Bible. In the Bible. Quran didn't copy any of those things, because the Quran doesn't copy anything, because it's from God.
But, so could you explain why there are similarities in narrative? Obviously, I'm not saying that it's not 100% similar.
I will explain. So remind me about this, inshallah. Why there's similarity. But the point I'm making is, the Quran could get so many things wrong, as you expect, logically speaking. A book 1400 years ago, how would the book know about what we have discovered about the universe today? That we know now the stars are receding from each other. The universe is expanding.
The ancient Egyptians knew all about that as well.
The ancient universe didn't know everything.
They knew about the sun, they knew about...
Did the ancient universe know that there is a common origin of the universe and the universe expanding? Because the ancient...
No. That was founded by a Christian.
Sorry?
The Big Bang Theory, that was founded by a Christian.
Which Christian?
The priest. Yeah, the French priest.
Which French?
I forget his name. Yeah, the first person.
You're talking about long after the Quran.
Yeah.
When the Quran talks about أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Do not the unbelievers see that the heavens and the earth was joined together as one piece, and God parted it asunder, and He brought every living thing from water? Would they then not believe? Quran is telling you that there was a common origin of our earth and our universe, and then there was a separation, asunder, ratak and fatak. It's like Big Bang, as they say. I'm not saying this Quran is talking about the Big Bang, but the Quran is clearly telling you about the common origin of the universe and our earth, and the separation afterwards. So information like this, you expect the Quran to get it wrong. Why? Because this requires a lot of scientific advanced tools to know this. Can you see the universe expanding? Look up.
No.
You can't. You can't see the universe expanding. You can't see the stars going away from each other. A lot of science and theory of science, models of science are required. So when the Quran talks about that mountains have a specific feature, today you might think, yeah, of course, but back then it's impossible. Okay, describe me a mountain.
A mountain is a landscape, a type of landscape.
Yeah.
Where
Not how it's formed, but this description of its external feature.
So it's upward lifting.
Upward lifting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up to a high altitude.
Correct, but partially correct. Why I say that? Because this is just the surface of the mountains that you see. Most of the mountain has downward elevation, what we call the roots of the mountains. Most of it is downwards. Have you heard of tip of the iceberg?
Yes.
What we see above the sea of the ocean is just a little bit of tip, and the rest is downwards.
Yeah.
Quran describes mountains like that. It's like autad, mountain having roots. Who would have known mountains have roots like this? Can you go into a mountain near Himalayas and say, mountain, it has more roots than that? You can't start digging and finding out. Impossible. Through our technology today that we know mountains do indeed, because it's not just digging and digging and digging that you know mountains have roots. Other technologies, sonars, they reflect back how far the level is and so on and so forth. So information like this, you expect the Quran to get it wrong, not to give information which we discovered today. So the Quran, when it says, if it wasn't from God, you expect surely to find many errors and discrepancies like that. So this is another falsification test Quran offers to falsify. Because if a sincere researcher goes and finds an error in the Quran, they are in the right mind to reject the Quran. Because according to the standards of the Quran, very criteria of the Quran, it cannot be from God. Have people succeed in finding an error in the Quran? You'll find...
Some people
No,
believe they have.
they claim.
Yeah, claim.
We have been coming here. We've been present in our World Wide Web. No one is able to demonstrate an error in the Quran. I used to talk about it every single week, few years back. Why is it impossible to demonstrate? So this is maybe you can ask the critics of Islam. Have you found any? If you can't find any, then ask yourself, why are you unable to find an error? Error where you expect it to find. A book that is not just any book free from any errors is from God. That's not what we're saying. A book like the Quran, you expect it to have errors. If I give you a phone book with no mistakes, everyone's phone number is correct, it doesn't prove it's from God. Yeah? But if I give you a book that talks about the ancient history, what happened 1,000 years ago, what they did and what they left, and I talk about what will happen in the future, it cannot get it all wrong. Imagine the Quran says, look at those two superpowers, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire. The Romans have been defeated. But soon what will happen is they will regain victory. They will regain victory between 3 and 9 years. It's easily falsifiable after 3 and 9 years. On the 10th year, if they didn't regain victory, the Quran would have been false.
So the Quran predicted the fall of...
That's what the Quran says. غُلِبَتُ الرُّومِ The Romans have been
the Ottoman
defeated.
Empire-
في أثناء الأرض.
And the Ottoman Empire, he was...
Not the Ottoman. We're
No,
talking
because
about
Ottoman
the
Empire
Persian
took
and the
over.
Byzantine.
Okay, but I'm talking about the fall of Roman, after the Romans took over.
This is talking about the Romans and the Persians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's before, way before.
So the Quran is revealed when it's unnecessary for an imposter prophet to have his prophethood on stake. What if it turns out to be false? Then he's going to be a false prophet and the Quran is going to be a false book. Easy. Many people say the world's going to come to an end in 2020, in 1987, whatever. And when that year comes, we know that they were liars. They are fraudsters. Yeah? So the Quran was an ample opportunity for the critics of Islam to demonstrate to the whole world Islam is a false religion, Quran is a false book claiming to be from God, and Prophet Muhammad is a false prophet, an impostor. But it exactly turned out to be as the Quran said. How do you predict between two superpowers that, imagine now somebody says, Russia in 2 years later will overthrow America. How can you say that? I mean, you don't even have no idea what's going to happen in the future. It's easy to prove you wrong 2 years later. That's right.
So what does the future hold then, according to the Quran?
So the Quran, brother, what I'm saying, the Quran gives you all these falsification tests to prove it wrong, and people cannot falsify it. Okay? Now your question about similarities. You asked about how is the Quran similar? If the same God sent Prophet Moses to a group of people to guide them through the prophets, why wouldn't the Quran remind the next generation people, us for example, their mistakes, their errors, and their good things they've done, to learn from it? Why do we learn history, read history? Because history can teach us a lesson of how not to behave. When we go to Greek and other places and we see the ruins, shouldn't that be a reminder to us what happens to people when they become so arrogant and do corruption and so on? It's not like, look what happened, beautiful. It's really mind-boggling how people totally misunderstand history. They go for sightseeing, take some selfies. You should be asking yourself, that empire that they built, why they were destroyed. What happened to them? No traces left apart from few stones. God tells us the reason why we should learn history, because history is an evidence of what can happen to people if they misbehave, if they do things which is not in accordance with God's law. Yeah. So when the Quran reminds people of what happened to the people who call themselves Christians, they venerated Christ so much they elevated him into a God. And God says, no, desist. Your God, your Lord is one. He doesn't have a son, and God is not a Trinity. So the Quran corrects them. So of course Quran engages with the previous people's belief system to show what is correct and what is false. That's why similarities are there and differences are there.
But would you agree with me if I say even Islam has a bad history as well?
What do you mean by bad history?
I wouldn't say bad, but it has obviously in the early stages of Islam, there was conflict, the Crusades.
Islam didn't initiate the Crusades.
Okay.
What are the Crusades? Do you know?
But then even within Saudi Arabia, they had to fight.
Do you know what the Crusades are?
Yeah.
When Islam is expanding, where is it expanding? To some other lands.
Yeah.
Whose lands? The lands of by the Christians and the Roman Empire and so on and so forth. So they are now really concerned to protect their lands and their belief and so on. So they started fighting back, okay? But they fought back unjustly. They not only killed the Jews and Muslims can never fight unjustly. The principle of Islam is you fight those who fight you, but do not commit transgression.
So what do you have to say to jihadists? So like 9/11, they did what they did in the name of Allah.
The Americans?
To them, yeah.
Who did it?
No, I'm saying the terrorists.
Regardless of who's done it, killing innocent people is unacceptable, wrong, totally
Even
unacceptable.
if Muslims do it, can you say that?
Even if Muslims do things which are un-Islamic, it's wrong. If a Muslim goes on and then takes the life of an innocent individual, he's a criminal or she's a criminal and they should face justice.
So Osama bin Laden, he orchestrated 9/11.
I'm not going to talk about any individual. I'm saying anyone. Because have you spoken to Osama bin Laden?
I've never spoken to him.
Exactly. So you don't know what he believed, what he said and so on.
Have you spoken to him?
No, that's why I'm saying we cannot speak about people. We cannot speak about individuals and so on. We leave them, but we look at the apparent action. If some people or some organizations say it's okay to kill innocents, they are totally wrong. Okay?
Jihadists as well. And to an extent,
Look. Again, you are not stating things wrongly. In Islam, we should all do jihad, including yourself.
yes, but the interpretation.
Wait. Now you're saying yes,
Yeah.
when you said no earlier. So now let's do, what is jihad?
Look,
What is jihad? Jihad is the internal and external struggle. Internal struggle is where you try to elevate yourself from your desires of your own self to become a truly human being with good, noble character. Uplift yourself in your nobility and your character, right? That is your internal struggle, jihad. The external jihad is to remove oppression from the land, from the society. So you would, for example, if someone came to attack you, if someone came to attack you, you would not sit there and say, oh, here is my little brother there. Look, listen. The enemy comes to attack you, you're not going to say, oh, here's my little brother hiding underneath the bed, go and kill him. Islam is not a cowardice religion. Islam is a religion of justice. And say, look, these enemies are coming with injustice. They want to kill, they want to annihilate from people from existence. They want to create havoc in society and corruption in society. So you resist, you fight them. So in Islam there's a mechanism of that, where it's not one individual will do that, it will do that by its state. The state will have its army to protect its citizen, Muslim or non-Muslim. So if you are a non-Muslim in an Islamic state, in an Islamic country where Islam is implemented, an enemy comes, they will protect you, make sure they protect you too. That is the justice of Islam. So jihad and jihadists are different things. Jihad is a very just universal principle what every human being should accept, because it's all about justice. Okay, so now let's come back again to the point we're discussing. The Prophet, he cannot be an imposter when you look at his life again. So not only the evidence is brought that speaks for itself, but when we look at his life,